I know so many people that are lukewarm. Like, yeah, the job's pretty good. There's good benefits, but I don't really like it. I'm not really doing what I want to be doing, but I can't imagine leaving, this. And I had nothing to lose. And I had so much pain. And I think the greatest thing that happened in my life was that I had absolutely nothing to lose. I didn't have a job to lose. I didn't have a reputation to lose. I didn't impress my parents with my grades and get into Brown. And then I had to say, no, Dad, I want to go be an entrepreneur. And they're going to be like, what? Like, you put all this time in, and I had nothing. So I had this blank slate that I basically, as much pain as it was, I was like, I can kind of choose what I want to do. And I don't even have to make that much money because I can go work at a convenience. I can go work at a photo shop, like an area like that prints photos, and I do my thing on the side. The blank palette of not having anybody to answer to and no expectations allowed me to create exactly the career that I wanted to do, which is so ironic because I never would have thought that was the case at the time.
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com. Vince, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much. This is a pleasure.
Yeah, so I was referred to you by way of our mutual friend, Clay Haybear, who has sent me nothing but amazing people to interview, so I'm expecting nothing less from you.
Yeah, I said that's a lot of pressure, but I'm good.
But before we get into your work, I want to start by asking you, where in the world did you grow up, and what impacted where you grew up end up having on your life and your career?
I grew up was born in Queens, New York, moved out to Long Island, New York as a kid, and I think it had more than I ever realized until I was older and I moved away, how much of an impact, like even in just my personality, the way I handle people. Moving to the Midwest was a culture shock for me. We live in Pittsburgh now, but we lived in Indiana, and realizing that I was a New Yorker, I didn't realize I was a New Yorker until I left. And I realized, oh my God, we are so different than everybody else. So yeah, it's still brought into conversation all the time now at 46.
So how old were you when you left New York?
I was 26 years old.
Oh, wow. So you literally did grow up in New York, like your whole childhood, adolescence, all of that was in New York.
Yeah, all the pain, everything. Yeah.
And you're of Italian descent, you said, right?
I am.
So I'm curious, what if any impact did culture have on the choices that you've made? Because I know that, being of Indian descent, like it's had a huge impact on the choices that I've made or chose not to make. Yeah,
I don't know if it's been a tremendous amount. We didn't, we're Italian, but we're not like the Italian that you see in the movies. Mm-hmm. There wasn't the deep-seated culture that I'd even seen in other Italian families. Like, we have a wonderfully close family, but it wasn't like everything was done this way because we're Italian and everything. So it was a blend, because you grow up in a blended community. On Long Island, a lot of Jewish people, some Italians, where we were. So it wasn't like we weren't in Brooklyn where everybody was, the same and kind of like all the tradition and culture. So it was muted. I would say it would be muted.
Wow. What exactly planted the seed for you to become, of all things, a sports photographer? Because I know you've been able to photograph some iconic moments.
Yeah, it was out of pain and desperation. I was 22 years old. Well, actually, I'll back up. I was a terrible student and in school. So I literally graduated. I found out the day before graduation that I was even going to graduate from high school. I never cared. I never saw the value in it. I was not a good student. So I remember even my guidance counselor saying to me, like, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, I don't care. I don't know. I just don't want to wear a tie. And I remember I was 16 years old and she was annoyed with my answer, but I was serious. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I did not want to follow the path that everybody else in school was going with, which was just go to college, go to an Ivy League, which I wasn't qualified for anyway, and then get an office job. I saw that my dad was an entrepreneur. My mom was a government worker. So I saw kind of a contrast, and I always leaned towards what my dad did, even though he had really hard financial times. Like, we had his partner in business one day literally emptied out the bank accounts and left. Mm-hmm. And we were 15 years old, like broke, like we're about to lose the house. It was tremendous, trouble we went through, but I still loved what he was doing and the freedom that he had. So I wandered, for years. I I was a thief, just to be totally honest with you. I worked at a convenience store, and I had very little scruples with my coworkers, and we would kind of overcharge customers. I got arrested for stealing when I worked at a Record World factory, if you're old enough to remember Record World. And I got taken out in handcuffs. And, it was one of those things where I literally, at 22 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night with a nightmare that I got caught stealing again. And I just sat up, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, I just sweating, and I went downstairs, and I still lived with my parents. I had moved back in with my parents. And my dad came downstairs, and, we didn't get along very well. And if you could tell by my history, there was a good reason why. I wouldn't have liked me either if I was him. And he basically said to me, he said, "What's wrong?" And I said to him, for the first time in my life, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Like, I was just scared and frightened. Like, it all hit me at once. In high school, people worry about this at 15. I didn't worry about it until I was 22. Mm-hmm. And I was already, on a bad path. And he literally said to me, he looked at me, he got a glass of water, and he said, "Well, you like traveling, you like sports," because that's what I did. I listened to, music, and I watched sports. I was kind of a bum. And he goes, "You like taking pictures," but I had like a point and shoot camera. He said, "Why don't you take a photography class?" That was it. And I said to myself, I'm going to do this. I said, I'm going to fail because I failed at everything else I've done in my life. But at least this sounds cool. So next year when I say I failed, at least I tried, photography, a sport. Because I remember looking on TV and like, instead of being in the crowd, like, could I actually be on the field with these guys? Could I be taking the pictures instead of being, a fan? So it was the first time in my life I went all in. So I bought a camera the next day. I signed up for classes at community college. And all of a sudden I had drive, like literally overnight. And that's how it started.
Wow. Several questions come from this, as you mentioned. Why is it that you think, people who are in those moments at sort of a fork in the road, right? You got arrested and you can either continue down this path of potentially petty theft and even bigger things, potentially finding yourself in jail for a long time, or deciding that, hey, I'm going to go all in on this photography thing. What do you think separates the people who choose between those two paths in that moment?
I really honestly quite often think it's the pain. I really do. I know so many people that are lukewarm. Like, yeah, the job's pretty good. There's good benefits, but I don't really like it. I'm not really doing what I want to be doing, but I can't imagine leaving, this. And I had nothing to lose. And I had so much pain. And I think the greatest thing that happened in my life was that I had absolutely nothing to lose. I didn't have a job to lose. I didn't have a reputation to lose. I didn't impress my parents with my grades and get into Brown. And then I had to say, "No, Dad, I want to go be an entrepreneur." And they're going to be like, "What? Like, you put all this time in?" And I had nothing. So I had this blank slate that I basically, as much pain as it was, I was like, I can kind of choose what I want to do. And I don't even have to make that much money. Because I can go work at a convenience. I can go work at a photo shop, like an area like that prints photos, and I do my thing on the side. The blank palette of not having anybody to answer to and no expectations allowed me to create exactly the career that I wanted to do, which is so ironic because I never would have thought that was the case at the time. Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you say to people who look at their life, particularly if they're further along in life? I mean, you're 26, and I thought about a lot about this, especially because I'm around the corner from turning 40, and things look a lot different than I thought they would when I was 26. What do you say to somebody who says, "You know what, but I don't have a blank canvas"?
I think everybody does. I don't buy that, because when you can have a conversation and you can really dig into what you like, what you love, what you like helping people with. Mm-hmm. That's where it's changed for us. Like, now we're into helping other people do that. I think it was on John Lee Dumas I heard a couple of weeks ago, which is like, the greatest person you could become is somebody who helps the person that you used to be. And I was like, that hits, because I used to be this person. So even my photography career was very selfish. It was what I wanted to do. And when I needed to get the picture, like, I'm going to have to kind of bump you out of the way to get it a lot of times, right? But it was I accomplished a lot. Everybody admires it, but it was kind of empty after a while, because it was all about me. I didn't really see who I was helping. I didn't see what I was helping, but I was getting to do really cool stuff. I still do. But that's where, like, even these last 3 years has phased into helping other people do that. So I think there's always a progression. There's always a pivot. And I think there's always something that we are either good at or we can help somebody else with, which I think is more important, that gets us closer. I don't think you're ever there. Yeah. Like if you would have told me right now, if you would have told me 10 years ago, you'll be where you're at right now. Like, we're literally traveling all 50 states with our family. after this book launch. Like, that's what we're doing this whole year. I would have said, game over. I won. But no, I'm here and I'm like, there's more things to accomplish. There's more things to, so I don't think you ever get there. I think you always just need to be moving closer. So when somebody says, I don't have that, like, you have to have something to get started. And all you really need to do is get started and not stop.
Yeah. Why do you think it is that we have this illusion of sort of this I've made it moment, or this moment of arrival? Like, where does that come from? And why is it that somehow it's only by getting to where you think you want to go, you realize that? That's
a great question. I don't know if I have an answer for it because I'm trying to figure it out myself.
Yeah.
Because I struggle with it, but I've come to accept it. I've come to, like, I love that because, we did an interview. There were 2 interviews we did, with famous people. Like, one was John Mellencamp, and he came to town. I photographed the concert with him. So we got to interview him, and his album wasn't doing great at that time. This was probably early 2000s. And the interview, it was kind of like sarcastic, like, do you miss the days of, Pink Houses, like the big song? And he laughed and he goes, man, I've been to the top and there's nothing up there. So I'm good doing what I'm doing. And I remember hearing that and it really hit me. And there was another one was Deion Sanders, and he had won the Super Bowl. I think it was with the 49ers. His first one that he ever won. And that was his dream his entire life. And it was one of the most down nights of his life because he won the Super Bowl, the be all end all, the pinnacle. And he was depressed. He was like, this is it. This is what everything, like, it doesn't feel like what I thought it would be. And I think that's when he said he almost committed suicide that offseason. I remember hearing that, later on that was the case. So it really told me, like, you never get there. And so when I'm 93, I'm not going to be there because I'm going to be trying to be the guy that I am when I'm 98. Mm-hmm. And once I accepted that, it's like, this is just a fun game to keep growing and learning and making mistakes with. And it's just a better than yesterday thing. So that's taken a long time for me to develop and learn.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that another thing that comes up when we're in these situations, you said, better than yesterday. And so often the person we're trying to compete against is somebody else. And really the only person worth competing against in life is a previous version of yourself.
100%. And you couldn't have told me that at a certain point in my life.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's people right now like, yeah, that sounds good, but I got to do this. Or my parents think I need to do this. Like, no, there comes a point, and maybe that's maturity. I don't know what it is. It took me a long time to mature. But yeah, it's the type of thing where I wake up and that's what I need to do. I need to be better than yesterday. Mm-hmm. It takes all the stress away.
Yeah.
If I'm not better than yesterday, then I get stressed. Yeah. Right? I didn't do anything today or this week. But I don't need to be, this guy. I need to be me better than I was yesterday. And it's just like, okay, I don't worry about the past. I'm not stressed about the future. It's just today I got to do it. And I think that's just growth.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned you're traveling with your family. So I'm guessing that you're a parent. And I'm really curious, there are a lot of parents listen to our show. And I'm curious what you would want them to know. And how has this whole perspective influenced the way that you're raising your children?
Oh, it's amazing. This is what we teach them. This is my obligation. We have 3 boys. They're 12, 10, and 6. And it was kind of put in my place, even when I was writing my book and I was doing research, and I heard something from Reverend Billy Graham. And, everybody's trying to build this huge platform, and they want this following. And they asked him, and this was way back before Twitter, and Facebook, and they said, how could you have had a bigger impact in your life? And he said to them, and he was 90 about the time, I think, he said, I've spoken to stadiums filled with 80 and 90,000 people. And he said, but if I would have spent more time with my 3 kids, I would have had a bigger impact on the world. Mm. And that just hit me because I'm like, no matter how big you build your platform, that's a big platform. You get to speak to 90,000 people in a stadium.
Yeah.
And so that's when, not at that moment, but that really maybe said, this is where the main effort has to go. And I knew that, but that really put it in place for me. So even as we build these businesses, even as we do this, we want to do this together. We want to teach them the lessons. So, on this tour, like we're driving around, and I'm not sure if you're familiar, like Dave Ramsey, like mm-hmm. my kids got to meet him, in person when we dropped off a book. Dan Miller, we met with Pat Flynn last week here in San Diego. Yeah. My son got to talk to Pat for an hour, 12 years old. I'm like, do you realize, how valuable that is? And we're talking about the things that we're learning. So, we homeschool. So this is their school. This is where I think it needs to go in the future is they need to learn this stuff now because, it's not going the way I would want to teach in school. And that's why we went this direction. So it's a huge part of my life.
Yeah. Let's do this. Walk me through how you get from, that early photography class to doing the work that you do today, like the things that have happened in between, high points, low points, inflection points. I'm really curious because I think one of the things I had told you is I'm one of these weirdos who doesn't know a damn thing about sports, but plays sports video games. Almost every day I play Madden, but I couldn't tell you anything about what's going on in the NFL. The only game I ever watch is the Super Bowl.
That's awesome.
But, I'd imagine that you've captured some incredible moments in history. And I'm just curious, like from, that early photography class to this amazing career, like what's happened? How did you get to this point?
Oh, man, there's a lot there. In terms of how do we get here? Are you talking about stories? Like there's
story, however you want to tell it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just been let me think about that. That's a great question because there's so much. I mean, I've shot for 23 years. I'll go back that way. I've shot Super Bowls, World Series, NHL final, like anything you can imagine with sports. 4 U.S. presidents, like when they come around, like I photograph them. So it's been a steady. I'll give you the best lesson that I got along the process. I was in New York and I worked in New York and I was freelancing and I wanted to work for the Associated Press. In Manhattan, Rockefeller Center, right next to NBC, like the tree and everything. And I wanted to get there because that's where the big assignments came. Like I was freelancing for a newspaper in New York, but that was like, when you get an assignment for the AP, it's a world leader. It's a major event, every single assignment. So this was like 6 weeks of me trying to get in there after back work before that. And I finally got a meeting with Jonathan Elmer, who was the editor, and he canceled the meeting. I was like, and then I said it again for next Monday and he canceled it again. This went on for 6 weeks. And finally they took my meeting and I got in there with my portfolio, and I walk in there at Rockefeller Center and I sit down at the office and he said something to me that changed my life. And he said, Vincent, he goes, I want to thank you for your patience and your persistence. He goes, without either of them, we wouldn't be here right now. And I, as he's looking through my pictures where I got the gig shooting for the AP, I remember thinking like, don't forget that patience and persistence. Cause it's what I needed because the patience was a thing. Like I lacked patience. I was very impatient. I wanted everything now as it was. I needed to get it. The persistence, I didn't have the patience, but putting them together was like, if I just had patience, I would have waited too long and none of this would have ever happened. Yeah. And I know a lot of people like that. If I would have had persistence, I would have annoyed the crap out of everybody and I would have been pushed out quickly. So every assignment I've taken, every job, every connection, every relationship, I think that way. Patience and persistence. And that was probably the biggest lesson I got. I'm not sure if you're looking for lessons, but there's a million stories, from shooting the Super Bowl to having, I worked for the World Wrestling Federation for 2 years during their heyday. Wow. And I could tell you a funny story. If you want to hear a story, I'll tell you. Absolutely. Well, when I first started there, I got the gig and it was a pay-per-view gig. So I flew into, I think it was Milwaukee, and we did a pay-per-view gig. This was Stone Cold Steve Austin. This was when it was all booming. And so I did all the grunt work. And so that day we were doing some photo shoots backstage. So Goldust, who's I think he's 6'6", 240 pounds. He's the son of Dusty Rhodes, who's one of the most famous wrestlers of all time. I remember him. So he sees me and he's in his makeup and the costume, and the wrestlers don't have very much say in terms of how the photo shoot goes. Like the photographer set up the lighting, but he looks at me and he tells me to get a reflector, a gold reflector. He goes, stand over there. He yells at me. And I'm like, this is my first day. I'm going to do whatever he says, even though he's not my boss. So I stand there and I'm holding the reflector and he's kind of sniping at me. They do the shoot and then he goes to catering to go get dinner before the show. So Rich Frieda, one of the photographers, comes up to me and he gives me the Polaroid. We were shooting with Polaroids back to check the lighting. And he goes, bring this over to Dustin was his name. And he goes, see what he thinks, which was not protocol, but I didn't know this. And I walk it over to him and he looks at me and he crumbles it up and he curses at me and he rolls it and throws it right in my face, says, this looks like crap, but not that language, and walks away from me. I'm like, oh man, that wasn't good. So I pick it up and I bring it back and they go, well, that's just Dustin. Don't worry about him. Just stay away from him. He's kind of mean. So we get ready for the show. My first show ever. And I'm putting my headset on because, you need to have your headset on so you don't get in the way of the TV cameras or you don't get blown up by pyro. So you need to know what's going on all around you. So I'm ringside and I'm literally getting ready to walk out to ringside and I feel a slap on my back. And I look up and it's Goldust. He's looking right down at me, a huge guy. And I'm like, I don't know what to say. And he says, do you work here full time? And I'm like, no, I'm stuttering. I'm like, no, I'm on contract or whatever I said. And he looked me right in the eye and he goes, if I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you. And he walked away. And I just stood there stunned. And, so I walk out and I'm going out I'm literally have to walk out on the ramp to the ring, and he's about to wrestle, 4 matches in, and I'm shaking. I'm as nervous. And I just look at Tom, my boss, and I'm like, what do I do? So I'll never forget. I'm in my headset and I hear like the crackling and I hear enter Goldust, because you know who's coming in next. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like here it goes. And I was not nervous. I'm like, okay, it's going to be on TV, so I'm safe. And as soon as he gets in the ring, he puts the wrestler, the other guy, his opponent, in a headlock, and he's looking right at me, and he's like sneering. And it's the first time I remember, like, oh my goodness, I'm not safe. He could use me as a prop. Like, he could throw me in the ring. They do this all the time. They could take the photographer and use him as a prop. He could really hurt me. Like, he could, and everybody pretends like they're hurt. I'll really be hurt. I'll be selling it very well, but I'll really be hurt. I'm like, I was so scared. And he won the match. He walked out of the ring. He left, and nothing happened. And I went home and I almost quit. I called my boss, and he goes, no, we'll talk to people. So the next week we're in Texas, in Austin, and Goldust sees me, and he yells at me. He goes, you cost me $10,000, brother. Vince McMahon fined me for screwing with you, and I won't forget this. And so this went on, and it went on, and it went on and on. It got muted. It wasn't as bad, but it went on. So 2 years working there. And then I quit to go back to school. I had to I was going to get my degree. So I said, I'm done working here. And they hired me for one last shoot, which was a documentary, a 3-day behind the scene thing. And the last night of the shoot, we all gathered together. They did kind of like a thing for me because it's my last shoot, and they're telling stories, and we started talking about pranks. And then Rich starts talking about the biggest prank they've ever pulled. And they're telling the story about Goldust and me and blah, blah, blah. And I'm looking at them, and they're laughing with me like I should be laughing. And I said, guys, that was an awesome story, but you forgot to tell me it was a prank. They never told me. The whole thing was set up, but they were supposed to tell me like that day. They never told me. So it went on for 2 years. I thought this guy wanted to kill me.
Wow.
So that's a little bit of it.
Wow. So I don't know about you, but vacuuming is not one of those things that I ever look forward to doing. But as you know, your environment has a huge impact on your creativity. So I still like it to be clean wherever I'm living and working. But now it doesn't have to be something that you deal with. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, you probably fantasized about the day when cleaning your house would be like it was for the Jetsons, meaning you don't have to lift a finger. Well, the good news is that we're already kind of living in that future. And the easiest way to make sure your floors are clean every day is with the iRobot Roomba Robot Vacuum. It cleans up after itself. The Clean Base automatic dirt disposal takes convenience to a new level, automatically empties its own bin into an allergen lock bag that holds 60 days of debris and traps 99% of pollen, mold, and dust mites, so you can forget about vacuuming for months at a time. Let the Roomba clean for you instead. It learns your home, finds dirt, and empties itself on its own. It's got powerful cleaning performance made effortless. Remember, if it's not from iRobot, it's not a Roomba. To learn more, go to irobot.com/unmistakable. Oh. When you're photographing like Super Bowls or NHL championships, moments in these careers, I mean, what do you look for? And what have been some of your most unforgettable, moments that you've seen through the lens of a camera?
Oh yeah. It's emotion for me. It's a moment in time that will never come back. I photographed the Super Bowl where the Patriots beat the Rams, Tom Brady's first Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. And it was right at their 9/11. And it was just just the security, 4 layers of security to get in. You got to be there. I remember that was 2002. I started my career 2004, 2005. And I remember walking in, and it was almost like, I wish there was like a camera crew, because I remember walking in the lights of the Superdome, and I remember walking onto the turf and be like, oh my God, I made it. That was the moment where I was like, I made it. Like, this was a dream of mine forever. Watching the Super Bowl, growing up, I'm like, I am on the field at the Super Bowl. And then, the halftime show was U2. And I'm looking to my right, and I see this guy that looks like Bono, but I'm like, it looks like Bono's kid. Like, he's short. He didn't look very big. You have this larger than life perception, and all of a sudden I'm like, well, that's Bono. He's like 3 feet away from me. He walks out on the stage and does one of the most, iconic Super Bowl halftime shows ever. The tributes at 9/11. Mm-hmm. Just those moments. Like, even this year when the Penguins won the Stanley Cup, I was in Nashville. I mean, one of the loudest arenas I've ever heard. Just to be a part of that, to be a part of history. I went back, I stayed at my friend's house. It was 2:00 in the morning, and my ears were still ringing, and the game ended 4 hours earlier. And, to look back on that picture, you freeze it in time, But when you think about when you shot it, I don't even remember shooting it because you're in such a zone that you're just looking for that. And while everybody else, 19,000 people are screaming and arms waving, you don't hear any of it. Mm-hmm. You're just looking and you're looking, and not only getting it in focus and capturing it, but making it creative and making it timely. That's the challenge to me. I can never get tired of that part of it.
And you focused individuals as well, right? I'm curious, for the people that you focused as individuals, what is the interaction with them like? What do you see through the camera that they don't perceive you seeing? And what are the moments that lead to a connection between you and somebody you're photographing?
In sports, it's different because like I joke around. Everybody's like, "Oh my God, you're on the sidelines." Like, yeah, I joke around like it's like you're 5 inches away, but you're a million miles away. Like I'm on the sidelines, and when the Steelers won the playoff game last year, it's Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, which are the big names in the Steelers. If you're not familiar, and me, three of us. Like I have no business being there. And they'll joke with us. Like they'll pull pranks on photographers sometimes. And there's always time like Antonio Brown comes up to me and goes, "Let me get your email address. I got to get that picture." And then the PR guy cuts in front and he's like, "No, he gives me his." I'm like, "I don't want your email address." That'd be kind of cool if Antonio gave me his email address and we go back and forth. Yeah. Like there's always something funny, like getting run over. Uh-huh. That's something you have to worry about because especially now with the internet, you get knocked over in some kind of silly moment on the sidelines. You'll get home and you'll be internet famous in a way you don't want to be. So, like it wasn't like that 10 years ago. Now it's like you don't want to be caught like looking at your phone. Yeah. Like, what are you doing? Aren't you working? Everybody sees you. So it's this public eye. It's fun. It's funny. It's like anything else because there's so much boredom that goes with it. There's so much pregame stuff and postgame work and all. Everybody sees all the highlights. But there's not that much interaction when you talk about the sports in terms of the players. You're pretty much on your own. And that's what I kind of got a little tired of in terms of photography. I felt like I was by myself. And I love conversation and I love meeting with people and I love helping people. So it's like that kind of, I feel lonely when I'm doing it. So that's I think at that moment when I realized that is when I started fading a little bit away from the photography part. Because I'm like, I don't really want to just document other people's lives my entire time and not be a part of it. Mm-hmm.
How has the advent of social media, digital tools like iPhones, Instagram, how has that sort of affected your career? How does that affect the craft of photography, in your opinion?
We've kind of not embraced it the way others have. We've been very old school in terms of it. So it hasn't affected me too much because I'm pretty much to myself with what I do. We haven't built up the Instagram following like we could have. Sure. But as the time it's happened is when we were also kind of pushing away from it. So you see people becoming internet famous, like Instagram famous, and that wasn't, by the time we started realizing this is something that we did and we're not going to be doing and we're going in a different direction, that's when all that stuff started really ramping up. So we've kind of like, it's not a big deal for us. And we're not private people at all, but it's just never been, we're always been about relationships, one-on-one relationships, connection, and it's never really been about the following part of it. And to good or bad, it's good in ways that we keep our sanity. It's bad in terms of like we should probably be much more well known than we are. But it's not a big deal to us.
Do you have a favorite moment in sports photography that you photographed, like one that stands out above all the others?
That's a great question. I don't know. There's so many. There were just so many. I mean, like I said, that Super Bowl moment was, I do. It was probably the first thing. It was my first press pass. It was 1995. And even if you're not a sports fan, you know Brett Favre. Mm-hmm. And so it was Brett Favre. I think it was his first MVP season. And it's so meaningful to me in so many ways because it was a year after I found photography. It was literally like that moment I told you about where I got, with my dad. That was May of 94. Well, this was August of 95. So not that far after. I had been hustling, sneaking into Yankees and Mets games, sneaking up to the front row like almost every night, 5-6 nights a week to like photograph, from close or meet the photographers or find out what kind of film they used or ask how you get a job in this industry or how does this crazy photography world work. That's what I would do 5-6 nights a week while I would work during the day at some crappy job. Well, I decided to take a 2-week road trip around the Midwest and try to go to like 9 different stadiums and do the same thing there. Go to Cincinnati, buy a cheap ticket, sneak down to the front, try to get a good picture of Pete Rose, whatever it would be, and go back and forth. For the last night, I was in Milwaukee and I could go to Chicago, and there was an Elton John concert, and I love Elton John. I was like, but I'd seen him in concert before, or the Packers were playing in Lambeau in Green Bay. And I'm like, well, I'd never been to Lambeau, and that's a historic field, so I'm going to go to Lambeau. So I drove up to Lambeau. I didn't have a ticket, didn't have a press pass, my hat on backwards. I look like a dope, and the game is sold out. And luckily, I found this older couple, and I'm looking for tickets, and it's a preseason game sold out, and they're tailgating 6 hours before the game. It was insane. And I found this older couple, and the wife didn't want to go to the game. So the husband said, I'll sell you a ticket for $20. So I got a ticket for $20, and I snuck, like I always do, I snuck to the front row, 2 hours before the game, hour and a half before the game. And I'm shooting pictures of warm-ups. And a guy comes up to me from the field, and he looks up, and he goes, are you taking pictures? And I said, yeah. I said, I don't know why he's asking. He goes, I said, what do you need? And he said, well, my assistant didn't show up tonight. I'm like, okay. He goes, would you want to be my assistant? And I said, absolutely. And the guy next to me, who was also taking pictures, was changing his film literally at that time. So he had his head down, so he didn't ask him. I had my head up taking pictures. He asked me. He literally opens the gate, hands me a press pass, puts it around my neck, and I'm now a professional photographer. I'm on the field at Lambeau Field. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, how did this happen? So he's pretty much saying, do whatever you want to do. All I need you to do is change film for me once a quarter, and you get to take all the pictures you want. So 3 minutes later, I'm in the huddle with Brett Favre as the Packers are getting ready to run out into the field. He looks right at me, smiles and winks because he knows I don't belong. I got like a T-shirt and a hat on backwards. I totally don't fit the part. But I'm like, I'm going to take advantage. This is my only time I'm ever going to be on the field of a football game. So I was in the huddle. They run on the field. Halfway through the second quarter, his name is Jim Jordan, who worked for NFL Films. He started my career for me. And he looks at me, and he points, and he says, get in the corner over here, the corner of the end zone. I thought I was in trouble. So I ran over, and I kneeled down, and Brett Favre rolls out, and he throws a pass to Dorsey Levens from the Packers, scores a touchdown right in front of me. And him and Mark Trimmer, they embrace in this big hug, and I get a picture, best picture I've ever shot in my life up until that point. And I'm like, oh, my God, what just happened? And I look at Jim, and he turns back towards me, and he winks. And I'm like, what's going on? So I run literally across the back of the end zone, and I stop him underneath the goalpost. I said, what just happened? And he looks at me, he smiles, and he says, well, we've got Favre mic'd for NFL Films. I knew where the play was going, so I wanted to put you in a good spot so you can get a picture. And I remember like it was yesterday just staring up at the sky and being like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, what is going on tonight? Like, what is happening? I photographed the rest of the game. I was going to go into the locker room, to get the interview with Mike Holmgren, the coach, to get like the press conference. And I said, can I do that? And Jim's like, yeah, you're NFL Films. You can do whatever you want tonight. I'm like, okay, I'm going to. So I went into the press room, and the PR guy comes up to me from the Packers. And he looked like the principal from Back to the Future. Do you remember that movie?
Yeah, totally.
He looked just like him. And he said, what are you doing in here? And I said, I'm NFL Films. I was kind of like arrogant. I'm like, I'm NFL Films, right? And he looks at my press pass and he snaps it off my neck. And he goes, wait, right here. And he comes back and he goes, okay, you're good. And I was too nervous to ask anything, but I didn't ask for the press pass back. So I shoot the pictures and I leave the stadium. And literally, Lambeau Field, before the renovation, you walked from the locker room, you open the door, and you were in the parking lot with the crowd. And I remember opening the door and being in the crowd, and I said to myself, I don't want to be here anymore. I want to be in there. And that's the night my career started. And to this point, I've shot in 140 different stadiums around the country, and that is the only press pass I don't have.
Wow.
So I got to get that back somehow.
So if anybody's listening and knows how to get it back, let's get it back to you.
August something to that. I think it was the 25th. I think it was August 25th, 1990. Oh, yeah, 1995.
So a couple other questions come from this. To get to that point within a year of starting, I'm really curious about that first year, like how you were spending your time, what that period of your life taught you about mastery of craft. But another question on the heels of that, given where you are today, this is a question I think that's hot on my mind because of the fact that I have a book coming out about this subject. When we look at creativity, I think especially in the modern world, we have become very adamant that it's only worth doing if it leads to some sort of monetary outcome or has 1,000 people. It's like, why create something if nobody's going to pay attention? And I think that's sad. Yeah. And so the two questions are, in that first year, what did you learn about mastery of craft? And has your definition of creative success changed throughout your career?
Those are great questions. I learned so much from that first year. It was probably the most important year of my life. As a matter of fact, the first 5 years of my photography career, I think I made less than $20,000. And it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Because when I coach people now, when I teach people now, the biggest problem I see, and it's not just now, is the inability to delay gratification. The inability to be able to say, this is a long game. This is going to take time. It's like now with the phones, like you can take a great picture with an iPhone and use a filter, and now it blurs out the background for you. It does everything, but there's no honing of your craft. So what people don't get is, if the phone can do that for you, it can do it for everybody. What are you doing differently that's going to make you stand out? Because it's getting harder and harder to stand out. And that's a vision thing. That is from the heart. That's from the soul. So I had the ability to shoot manual, everything, manual cameras. I got, when I worked for the NHL in the first couple of years, like we had to shoot with strobes, which meant that when I took a picture, the strobes and the lights in the rafters fired, and there was a 4-second recycle time. So if you think about with sports photography, everybody lays down in a motor drive, 8 images per second or 12. I had one every 4 seconds. So when I started shooting for real, I had my timing down better than everybody because I had to shoot. When there was a breakaway, I had one shot to get it. And instead of laying down on it and not developing the chops, I had to study the motion, the move, the eyes, the body. I had to study it. And same thing with that first year. I went and I had to study the light. I had to study the way the players were, the interaction, the in-between moments. That's what I'm really good at, is the in-between human moments, subtle, behind-the-scenes storytelling. That's what I love. The action photography is great, but it gets kind of boring to see another levitating football player. But real moments, real things that show humanity and the person. And the stuff that, when you see a picture 20 years later, you still go, that's a great shot. That tells a story. So that first year just taught me the grit that's needed. And now no matter what career I do, I take that thing into it. I move that because I just know it takes time. And it takes patience and persistence, and it takes better than yesterday. And it's not going to happen overnight. The best thing that happened to me, it didn't happen overnight, because I got to see what it took to do it. And I don't think that's changed. I think it's gotten harder now because things are so much easier to start. And I think that's a struggle, especially if you're 23 right now and you want to build a following. I start with one person and do the best you can for them. And they will tell somebody about you. And you don't need that many people to really make it happen.
And how has your definition of success changed with age?
Yeah, it's always changing because I used to think it was money. Mm-hmm. Then I thought it was time, and I think it's more time than money, and that's what we value right now is our time. We have 3 young boys, and we're not giving up that time because when they go off on their own, we will know we did it right by our definition, and by our definition was being with them, and was traveling with them, and was teaching them, and it wasn't. That's why we homeschool now. And I'm not nothing against school or anything like that. But we saw, the whole her working a job and me working a job and putting the kids in daycare and them going to school and have somebody else teach them. Because I don't even think school. Everybody's like, I'm not a teacher. This is off tangent, but like of course you are. If you have a kid, you're teaching them. But if your definition of teaching them is standardized testing, well, that's not our definition of teaching. Our definition of teaching is what kind of a person are you? What are you learning? How are you growing? How are you dealing with challenges? How are you interacting with other people? How are you helping other people? How are you connecting with other people? So success to me is so simple. It's being a better person than I was yesterday, right? It was being a better dad, being a better husband, and then having that relate to the people in my life. I don't look at it in terms of this big game, like people have to know who I am or what my following is. It's like, this is where, just like Billy Graham, if I spend the time with my kids and my family, I'm having the most impact in the world. So that's a long-winded definition of my success.
I think the thing that struck me most is not necessarily your definition, but the fact that you emphasize that this is our definition. And it is something that I have thought a lot about over the last year or so, and how we define things. And I think the most profound thing I realized is that having your own definitions for words gives you a great deal of agency over your life as opposed to operating on somebody else's definition.
I totally agree with you. Just like somebody listening to me, I'm not trying to convince them that this is the way they should do it. This is the way we need to do it. If that inspires you and that helps you, that's awesome. If it doesn't, like Seth Godin would say, this is not for you. Mm-hmm. But I'm not trying to do what everybody else does. I'm usually trying to do the opposite of what everybody else does. Like we went to Legoland here on Sunday, and my wife and I were both like, I don't want to say it, but I'm kind of miserable. Like we're kind of in line with everybody else. You know, we don't ever live this life. Like when we go out to dinner, it's when everybody else doesn't.
Yeah.
You know, we've built our life to where we do things, you know, when we go, you know, even this trip, you know, we're in Tucson, Arizona for a month renting a house. You get it for a song because nobody else is doing it. Beautiful weather. Like we do things the opposite. So when we get in line on a Sunday afternoon with everybody, like just, you know, get me out of here. And we know our kids are having a great time. We're trying not to be grumpy about it, but like this isn't the way we want to really spend our days. But even though we love, you know, so yeah, this is our definition. And if we could inspire anybody with that to do that, or to think, oh my God, maybe I could do that, or that sounds great to travel with our kids and, you know, do your work from the road. Like that's wonderful. I'd love to inspire anybody with that.
Yeah. So I want to bring this full circle. I know we talked a little bit about your dad and the relationship that you had with him in the beginning. Given that he planted this seed in your life and led you to discover so much joy, I'm curious what has happened to the relationship with your dad over time.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, because up until 5 years ago, I still had a ton of resentment towards my dad. Believe it or not, like the stories I told were the good stories, not that he has bad stories, but we didn't have a great relationship.
Yeah.
You know, even through my 30s, there was always tension. We just butted heads. We're just too much alike. And so I drive him crazy. He drive me crazy. And it was the type of thing where I literally started writing a book, and that was my book. And what happened with the book, I'll be completely honest, it started out very sarcastic and angry. It was kind of a, you know, thumbing my nose at the people that didn't believe in me and saying, you know, kind of pounding my chest like, here, look, I did it. That's how the book started. And then as I started writing it, I wrote that story that I told you. You know, I wrote the story about my dad 10 years later when we were in a newspaper job, and I just won International Sports Photographer of the Year, and I got a 3% raise. And I came back to my dad and I said, can I work for you? And he said, no. He said, you live 15 hours away from me. I'd have to retrain you. And he said something that changed my life. He goes, Vin, I've been trying to tell you this. I've been trying to tell you to start a business. He goes, you have a skill, but you're not using it correctly. And I said, what do you mean? I was finally able to listen to him. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I've been telling you, you could do weddings, you could do commercial work, you could do corporate, but you're settling for a job where they control your schedule and the benefits, and you're settling for that. And he goes, you have a skill, but you're not using it correctly. Those two lessons he gave to me 10 years earlier, and that one changed the entire course of our life. We started our first business that day. But in between there was all this tension. When I started writing the book, I started writing these stories about my dad, and I realized, oh my God, he's not as bad as I thought he was. And then all of a sudden, by the time the book was over, he was the hero. Not even on purpose. I was like, oh my goodness, I was blind to so much of this. I listened to those two lessons, but I'm pretty sure there were about 2,000 other lessons in there that I didn't listen to because I wasn't listening. So our relationship completely changed. The resentment I had for him went away. Ironically, when the resentment that I had for him went away, our relationship started to change. He didn't change. I changed. I stopped being angry. When I stopped being angry, I started acting angry. I stopped acting angry. I started being more grateful. Unbelievably, he was a nice guy again. He didn't change at all. It was me. So it completely changed our relationship. So now we're great. You know, it's wonderful. And you know, we would have fights over holidays. That doesn't happen anymore. You know, I'm sure it'll happen again at some point. But you know, it's just completely changed because of that.
Amazing. Wow. I can see now why Clay referred you as a guest. So I have.
Did it work? Did I live up to?
Yeah, no, more than lived up. So I have one last question for you, which is how we finish all of our interviews at the Unmistakable Creative. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
Themselves. It has to be. It's them, because and it's such a lame answer, but it's true. It's like so many people are trying to be somebody else. They're trying to be their following, or they do it this way. And the funny thing is with me is people go, I like you because you're authentic. And I kind of almost take offense. I'm like, well, what else would I be? Like, what? It's a compliment, but I don't even see it. I'm like, is that an indictment of our society? Like, you like me? I stand out because I'm authentic? Like, I think everybody should be authentic because that's what we really need. So just yourself. And I think when you stop trying to be somebody else, you get to just kind of let the guard down and be like, I don't really give a crap what people think. I got to just do it my way. Because if my kids see me being a phony, then I've really failed. You know, if my kids listen to this interview and they go, that's not dad. Like, he's pretending to be somebody that he's not to do something. Like, I failed if that happened.
Amazing. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and share your story and your insights with our listeners. Where can people learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure and just so much fun to talk to you. TheFreelanceTribe.com is my website. If anybody has any interest in finding out about, what we do, it's all there.
Awesome. And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. While you were listening, were there any moments you found fascinating, inspiring, instructive, maybe even heartwarming? Can you think of anyone, a friend or a family member who would appreciate this moment? If so, take a second and share today's episode with that one person, because good ideas and messages are meant to be shared.